Hey there, and welcome to another one of these one-take shots at your key questions that you want answering that you're sending me, whether it's email, Instagram, Facebook, wherever it is you're firing me questions. I'm jumping on here, one take, answering that question and giving you the answers that you want. And today we are looking at an email from Brad Turner. Shout out to Brad Turner. How are you doing, my man? So Brad says, hey Simon, great shows, man. I'm binge listening via podcast through iTunes and a lot of great info. Brad is clearly a very intelligent man, a man who I admire, who has a good taste in both podcasts and good quality content. So good on you, Brad. Let's get on to Brad's question though. What's your thoughts on reverse pyramid workouts on the compound movements as a solid 6-week program? Do the heaviest set first for a few reps, drop the weight, add more reps next set, and so on for 3 or 4 sets total? Or should you incorporate on an as needed basis if you feel like you're stuck? Would love to hear your thoughts. It's a good question, Brad. So for those of you who have not done pyramid sets before and reverse pyramid sets and all those different sorts of things, it's basically like Brad's just described there. You're starting with a heavy weight for a low number of reps, and then let's say you're doing 4 sets in total. Your set 2 might be a slightly lighter weight, increase the number of reps. Then you might back off the weight again, increase the reps again, back off the weight again, increase the reps again for the 4th set. Now, I've explained before on different podcasts, Q&As, that type of thing, that the actual number of repetitions where building muscle is your specific goal, the number of reps doesn't really matter a whole much. It does matter if you're focusing on strength, then you really need to be in a lower rep range if your key focus is on strength. So if you're a powerlifter, something like that, you're going to be in that lower rep range, have to be in that lower rep range if you want to see those increases. However, the research is showing us that the actual rep range for building muscle is much, much broader than we used to think it was. So back in the days when it was all bro science and bullshit, it was a case of 8 to 10 repetitions was building muscle. Anything else was either building strength, endurance, or a complete waste of fucking time. Now, we actually know that that's not really the case. You can build muscle basically anywhere between, say, 4 and 30 repetitions per set. And that all comes down to really essentially what your personal preference is. As long as you are pushing yourself within those various different rep ranges to an equivalent level of effort, then the actual muscle you build will be, roughly speaking, the same. And arguably, there wouldn't be much difference you would see between various different rep ranges that you picked. And a lot of it is driven by a couple of different things. Firstly, it's going to be how advanced are you in the gym? So if you're a complete newbie coming into the gym, then are you really going to go and sit under a bench or sit under a bench? Why would you sit under a fucking bench? Sit on a bench under the bar. Told you this was one take. And then start to do your bench press with a super heavy weight. You really haven't got the skills, you haven't probably got the ability to retract your shoulder blades so that make sure your upper body is stable, that you're engaging your pec muscles, that you're performing that exercise correctly to add significant load to the bar, really to be safe. That's not really going to be the best way to do it. So theoretically then, when you're new into the gym, just starting out, it makes sense for you to hone the skills of those particular exercises, and particularly where compound exercises are being performed, because more often than not, they're with free weights. More often than not, you're going to be potentially able to lift more weight with those particular exercises. So the risk of you doing some damage if you're doing it wrong increases. So it makes sense that if you're a beginner, you come straight in to this gym environment, it's all brand new, that you therefore spend the time learning about proper form. You go in a higher rep range so that you have lighter weights, you can get used to that process, and then you can start to build up the repetitions, build up the weight from there. However, if you're more advanced, say intermediate, you've been training maybe for 2-3 years more, 5 years plus, then obviously you're going to be much more adept at lifting heavier weights. You can push yourself into different rep ranges. And then it will come down to sort of, I would say, like personal preference. So for me personally, a compound lift, I generally go a slightly lower rep range. So mainly I would probably hover anywhere between 6 to 8 repetitions, or slightly higher in the 8 to 10 repetitions. Sort of broadly speaking, that's 6 to 10 rep range for a compound exercise, because I feel like I can activate those muscles, I can get a lot out of those muscles, and getting stronger helps me to grow more. I find that works for me. I couldn't ever possibly imagine doing 30 repetitions of a barbell bench press. I think that would drive me insane. I think the level of concentration required to execute 30 repetitions well for that particular movement is difficult. And therefore, I would not personally find I would get the most out of that. However, if you're the type of person that would get the most out of those, then albeit, go for it, go for your life. The only difference there would say females, generally speaking, do better with slightly higher rep ranges. So you might find that the equivalent of 6 to 8 for a female might be 8 to 10, and the equivalent of 8 to 10 might be 10 to 12 for a female. So you kind of experiment with those different sorts of rep ranges. So really, when it comes to specifically Brad's question about reverse pyramid training, in my view, if you're beginner, then absolutely, it's definitely not necessary. Definitely not necessary. And even if you're more advanced, it's probably not necessary, quote unquote, in that scenario either. It could be beneficial if that's the way you want to train, and that helps you get a good workout in. You feel like you've worked hard, and that keeps you coming back to the gym, and it keeps you motivated and it keeps you moving forward. If that works for you, then great, but it's not necessarily essential. One way I would kind of, it's not necessarily reverse pyramid training, but I would use a similar concept, would be when you're trying to build muscle, it's important to go for progressive overloads. And that's a posh fucking term for basically just more reps, more weight, or more sets. Basically, you're increasing training volume over time. You're progressively overloading the muscles. That's what you want. So whether you're lifting 60 kilos on the bench press for 8 repetitions, if you come back the next week and you do 60 kilos for 9 repetitions, you've progressively overloaded that muscle. Likewise, if I were to do move the weight up, and I did, instead of doing 8 reps at 60 kilos, I did 8 reps at 65 kilos. Again, I've progressively overloaded that muscle. That's really what you're trying to do there. So progressive overload, and then tension in the muscle is kind of really what you're after. And when we talk about tension in the muscle, the way I like to think about it is this, is if you're a power lifter, or maybe even like a CrossFitter, then your goal is to make whatever exercise you're doing as easy as fucking possible. That's the goal. A powerlifter doesn't want to struggle as much as possible to squat, or bench press or deadlift. They want that bar to move quick, and they want it to move rapidly, and they want it to move easily. So they set that exercise up so that they can do that in the most efficient way possible. Flip that over to someone who, whether you want to call it building muscle, whether you want to call it toning up, or whether you'd say, well, I don't want to get bulky, I just want to get lean. It all means the same fucking thing. You basically want to build some muscle. It all means the same thing. So let's just talk on those lines. If that's what you want to do, then your actual goal is to make the exercise as difficult as possible for your muscle. You want to put them under tension. You want to make it inefficient to move that bar, and you want to put that muscle under so much tension that it is forced to work as hard as possible for every inch of that repetition. And that's what's going to generate the most effect. So if you're bouncing weights off of your chest, you're going into a squat and bouncing out of it, you are not, in that sense, really maximizing each repetition and maximizing your opportunity to build muscle, tone up, or whatever it is that you want to call it. So you have to understand that when you are doing those repetitions, is that you really need to focus on creating tension. So you're focusing on progressive overload, and you're focusing on creating as much tension in the muscle as possible. That's going to lead to most of your progress in the gym. However, there's also an element of metabolic stress. Now, if you want to call that, that's more like pump. So if you have ever watched Pumping Iron with Arnie, like was it 70s documentary, where he talks about the pump, and that's not really a very good Austrian accent, by the way. I can't do Arnie. I've got a Arnie style t-shirt on though, but can't really do the Arnie accent. Anyway, so in there he talks about like the pump being equivalent to coming, and he talks the equivalent of, he feels the muscles filling with blood and all this sort of stuff, and it's a great feeling. And he basically says he's coming in the gym, he's coming at home, he's coming everywhere. Just Arnie jizz flying everywhere. Not one to think about there. Anyway, Arnie jizz to one side, then what he's basically saying is that pump. Now, if you're going chasing that sort of pump feeling all the time, and that's the crux of your workout, you're missing out on most of your progress. However, it does have its benefits in building muscle, and that can come with maybe some higher repetition work, and it also can come with adjusting the rep ranges and the weights of a particular exercise. In a sense, a little bit like reverse pyramid training. But how I would use it would be like this. So for example, if I'm bench pressing, which is the example I used earlier, if I go for, let's say, 6 to 8 repetitions, I might do a few warm-ups and just make sure that I'm activating muscles, I'm feeling it in the chest, and I'm feeling ready to lift that heavy weight. When I then move into my top set, I might do 1 or 2 top sets. So that's all I'm doing is 1 or 2 all-out effort sets. That would be in the 6 to 8 rep range with the maximum amount of load I can take. And then I'll be pushing as hard as fucking possible in those 2 sets. Would I push to failure? Maybe close. Within 1 to 3 reps of failure, I would be pushing in those particular sets. But then what I might do on top of that, I might say, well, actually, I want to do 3 or 4 sets of bench press. Actually, if you remove the warm-up sets. Now, those subsequent sets, not necessarily drop sets in the sense that it's immediately after finishing that. What I then may do is just strip the bar of some weight and then actually just go for some higher repetition, lower weight work so that I'm getting that sort of pump effect. I'm getting that metabolic stress. So that would be the way that I would potentially use that type of training. It's not strictly speaking that reverse pyramid training as described by Brad in that question, but it is a form of that. And I'm basically prioritizing the progressive overload. I'm progressing the tension that I'm focusing on the tension that I'm creating in the muscle, but then I'm also adding in a metabolic element at the end. So for me, that's how I would use it. Someone brand new to the gym, less than 2 years worth of training, I probably wouldn't even touch it. Wouldn't even go near it. If you're intermediate, maybe you've built up some muscle, you're advanced, then I would start to be incorporating different set schemes and things like that. Obviously, the other exception to that I use with clients is supersets and traditional drop sets. And just to go into that in a little bit of detail is I would use a superset. Basically, I have a lot of clients that are training first thing in the morning before work, therefore time is a factor. So supersets are great just to speed through a number of exercises quite quickly in a confined amount of time. So that's where supersets come in useful. I would also potentially use drop sets if, for example, common one is side delt raises, whether that's cable, whether that is dumbbell, whatever. They can be quite a difficult muscle group to progress in terms of repetitions and weight, because often the jumps in weight are quite big and you can't really get the form and really get the number of reps you want. That's when a drop set may be useful, because therefore you can increase the volume going through that particular muscle group. You can make it work harder. You can progressively overload that muscle in a different way. So there would be like the set schemes that I would use in that sort of beginner scenario, but I would use others when I get into more intermediate and advanced. So Brad, I hope that answers your question. I hope that helps, and I hope anybody listening and watching to this found that useful as well. If you do have any questions you want me to answer on a future episode, then feel free to drop me an email. Come see me on Instagram. It's at iron_paradise_fitness. You can visit the website, iamparadisefitness.com. You can find me pretty much anywhere and everywhere. Happy to answer any questions you've got for a future episode of the show. But for now, keep living the lean life, and I'll see you for the next one.